Good to see everybody here tonight. Appreciate Pastor Josh giving me the opportunity. If you don't know me, my name is Brian Cox. My family and I are members here going on a little over 2 years now. I was a pastor for over 16 years. Pastored mainly in the upstate area. My last pastorate was down in Greenwood County, and have a Bachelor's of Arts in English from Anderson University, Master's and Doctorate from North Greenville. I was on Jamie's dissertation board. Don't hold that against me, all right? Really honored to be Jamie's faculty mentor while he was working on his D-Min. He really worked hard on it. He earned every bit of it, and was a pleasure to be a part of that. Jamie and I are very good friends. That's the reason when we sold our home in Greenwood and house became available right beside Dina's sister, Christy Guest. You know the Guest very well. Dina said, I want to live beside my sister. I said, okay. And we came up this way, and Jamie was a big reason. You hadn't called Pastor Josh yet at that time, but really excited about what God's doing here in our midst at church, and just a real pleasure each and every week to see folks joining what God's doing. You've got a great staff. You're really blessed, and really glad to be a part of that. For the past 2 years, I have worked for the South Carolina Department of Corrections. Prior to my wife passing away, I was assigned to what they call STG, Security Threat Groups. I dealt with high-level gang members in the prison system. When Dina passed away, the director of SCDC, Brian Sterling, was kind enough to give me a more accommodating schedule. And so now I cut grass every day, Monday through Friday. So went from dealing with volatile, high-level gang members to, riding around on a John Deere Gator all day, supervising people cutting grass. But grateful for that, grateful for the kindness that they've shown to me. All right, if you have your Bibles tonight, I invite you to open with me to the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to be looking at chapter 4 this evening. And the title of the study tonight is You've Got a Friend in Me. I don't know if you've ever really looked through the book of Ecclesiastes. We get a lot of great sayings from Ecclesiastes, but not a lot of people have spent a lot of time really diving into the book of Ecclesiastes. And a number of years ago, I took the church I was pastoring through the book of Ecclesiastes. The sermon series was titled Living Life in Reverse, because that's kind of the mindset that the writer of Ecclesiastes has. A lot of people believe it's Solomon. I think that's a fair assessment. But Solomon gives us some great words here in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 4, verses 1 through 16. And so if you would look with me, we'll begin reading this passage. The writer of Ecclesiastes says, Again, I observed all the oppression that takes place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed with no one to comfort them. The oppressors have great power and their victims are helpless. So I concluded that the dead are better off than the living. But most fortunate of all are those who are not yet born, for they have not seen all the evil that is done under the sun. Then I observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors. But this too is meaningless, like chasing the wind. Fools fold their idle hands, leading them to ruin, and yet better to have one handful with quietness than 2 handfuls with hard work and chasing the wind. I observed yet another example of something meaningless under the sun. This is the case of a man who is all alone, without a child or brother, yet who works hard to gain as much wealth as he can. But then he asks himself, who am I working for? Why am I giving up so much pleasure now? It is all so meaningless and depressing. Now here's what I want you to focus on in verse 9. He says, 2 people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in great danger. Likewise, two people lying close together can keep each other warm, but how can one be warm alone? A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. May God add his blessings on his word this evening. You know, one of the things I love about Pastor Josh is he interweaves a lot in his messages about songs, about music. Music really speaks to our heart, doesn't it? We connect with songs many times. And I was coming through the living room the other night, and my daughter Abigail, who's 14, was sitting on the couch, and she was watching Toy Story 3 on the Disney Channel. And I remember when the first Toy Story movie came out in 1995. It doesn't seem like it's been that long ago, right? 1995. And the theme song for that movie and all the other subsequent movies was written by a guy named Randy Newman. And the title of the song is "You've Got a Friend in Me." And part of the song says, "You've got a friend in me, you've got a friend in me. When the road looks rough ahead and you're miles and miles from your nice, warm bed, you just remember what your old pal said, boy, you've got a friend in me. Yeah, you've got a friend in me." And so tonight I want to talk to you for a few moments about how are we doing in the area of our relational capacity, in how we relate to others, and how we have a kingdom impact on others. I think Pastor Josh has been kind of alluding to this in messages. How do we as a church, outside the walls of this church, how do we develop relationships, whether they be with believers or maybe even with non-believers, where we can have a maximum gospel impact? And I think the writer of Ecclesiastes here gives us some potential roadblocks to that, but gives us also some answers to how we can do that. And so the first thing that the writer of Ecclesiastes talks about is the problem with life. The problem with life in the first 3 verses. He said, "I saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun, the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comfort. Power was on the side of their oppressors. And I declared that the dead who had already died, who are happier than the living, who are still alive, but better than both is he who have never been born, and he who has not seen the evil then that is done under the sun." Now, I want to ask you a question. How many times a week do you think you get asked the question, "How are you doing?" A lot, right? How are you doing? You multiply that, dozens of times at least during the course of a week, people ask you, "How are you doing?" But I want to propose a new way of asking that question. Instead of asking, "How are you doing?" I think we should be asking ourselves, "How are we doing?" How are we doing? I was thinking about all the things that's been going on in our country, even personally and in the lives of people that are around me. And people have questions. People, wonder, why do things happen the way they do? Why does this person who seemingly has never done really anything bad or wrong, why does something bad happen to them, but yet somebody that does all these horrible things just seem to kind of go through life scot-free? I work in an environment where people have done a lot of horrible things. And I have staff come to me because they all know my past. They know I'm a believer. They know I was a pastor for many years. They come to me and they ask me these questions. "Hey, Brian, why do these guys that have done these horrible things, why does it seem like, they're just kind of going along, but yet other people who are really good people, they're suffering?" Maybe when I was a pastor, I would get emails or I would get phone calls like this. "My husband's leaving, and we've got 3 small kids. Or I've been sick for a really long time. How does that glorify God? What's God's purpose in all that? Because I can't see it. Or maybe I've got this sin in me. I've got this struggle that no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I pray, no matter what I do, it's just weighing down on me and I can't seem to shake it off. And I started thinking about Solomon's frustration here with oppression and pain and the reality. And he's going to say here, and I like this so much, he says, you know what? Sometimes people that have power, that have influence, they really can't help either. You know, I've always been concerned, and this is coming from somebody who stood in a pulpit for many years and preached week in and week out, but I was always very concerned for people, whether they be pastors or speakers, whatever you want to call them, who would say something like, the 4 keys to deepening your faith, or the 3 steps to happiness. I was always really leery of that. And I think you should be too, for a number of reasons. Because what happens when you do those 4 things and you're still struggling? Or what happens when you do those 3 keys and things just still seem to be falling apart? And you think about that, and you feel like, is there something wrong with me? Well, Solomon goes, sometimes there isn't an easy answer. Have you ever come across that in life? Sometimes there's just not an easy answer. Sometimes there's not an easy answer for why things happen the way they do. Sometimes you can't just boil it down to some formulaic, concise expression. Sometimes there's just not an easy answer. And so Solomon here, I think, is saying that I've noticed that there's hurt, there's pain, and there's sorrow. And so how do we deal with it? How do we come alongside people in our lives and help them with those things? How can we be the church outside these walls? And so I think Solomon's saying here at first is at the center of our hearts is a desire to be the focus of attention. You know, it's the heart issue. And he says, I saw all the toil and all the achievements spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless and chasing after the wind. Have you ever noticed that sometimes you buy things or you get things, not because you necessarily need them, but because you want to look like somebody else, or you want to maybe impress somebody else? You know, I'm always amazed. I've never really been into trends, but you know, you go by Starbucks, and man, Starbucks is always packed, right? And if you like Starbucks, God bless you for that. All right, God bless you. You know, but I think, man, you know what? I go down to Spinks or something and get a $1 coffee or a $1.25 coffee, however much it is. But he's saying, how can we handle life on earth when there's pain and there's oppression and everything seems to be falling apart, and it just seems like people really don't have a genuine concern because we get wrapped up in ourselves? And so there's 2 things that Solomon says that invariably happens when we get too wrapped up in ourselves and our needs and our wants and our desires. He says, first of all, we become practical atheists. In verses 5 and 6, he says, the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and striving after the wind. He says we become, in essence, practical atheists. We don't live out what we profess to believe. But secondly, he says, we distract ourselves with busyness. Verse 8. There was a man all alone who had neither son nor brother, yet there was no end to his toil. Yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. So Solomon's saying we see this pain, we see this sorrow, we've got all these things that can go wrong, all these things that can happen to our souls, to our families. And on the other side, you've got people that will wound you, people that will hurt you, people that will, whether intentionally or unintentionally, do things that will wound your soul. And Solomon says there's really two ways of dealing with it. Some people just kind of fold their arms up and they say, you know what, forget about it. But other people busy themselves, whether it be in their work, their hobbies, their lives, whatever it may be, so they don't have to address their own fallenness and brokenness in the world. But Solomon goes on to say there's a better way, there's a third way. And he says it in verses 9 through 12, he says, two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them fall down, one can help the other up, but pity on anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though he may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. You know, I think there's a good word in this. Solomon goes, in the middle of all this, we need each other. In the middle of all the brokenness in the world, in the middle of all the things that happen on the news, that happen in our families, that happen to our co-workers and our friends, we desperately, in a very deep way, with Jesus Christ in the center of it, we need each other. And he starts unpacking this. He goes, because where there's two of you, there's a better return on your work. I want to ask you a personal question that you have to answer to yourself tonight. Have you ever really tried to bring healing to your soul? Because whether we want to admit it or not, we're all wounded to varying degrees. We've all had things happen in our lives that have wounded our hearts, that have wounded our minds, that have wounded our spirits. And to varying levels, we need healing. We don't like to admit that, but that's the reality of it. The deep place inside of you that keeps leading you back to the same failures. Have you ever tried to get inside and find healing in that, find some rest in that? It's a weighty and sometimes unbearable journey to deal with that, and praise God for people who come alongside of us and help us with that. Because can I tell you tonight, you need help with that. God didn't intend for us to walk this journey alone. If you can't see where you're weak and you're prone to fall, how are you going to keep yourself from falling? That's the question Solomon asked. If you really can't see your weaknesses, if you can't see where you're prone to stumble and fall, then how are you going to keep yourself from falling? And so we need men and women who know us in such a way that they're not afraid to come up to us and say, in a non-judgmental way, hey, I'm really nervous for you. I'm really concerned for you because I see this in your life, and I'm afraid that if it's not addressed, that it's going to cause you some pain in your life. And I find that few people really ever have friends like that. We want people to tell us the best things about us, right? Versus the things that they see that could cause us to stumble down the road. But in verse 11, Solomon talks about the necessity of keeping warm. And so contextually, it's simple. We know that shared body heat is a good thing, right? Two people are better than one, but the spiritual application here is a lot deeper because Solomon says when winter comes for you, when winter comes, and it will come, it comes for everybody. Nobody is exempt from it. When it gets here, no matter how cold it might get for you, being truly known by others will help keep you warm. And then he says in verse 12, if there's two of us, we'll be able to stand if somebody tries to attack us. He's basically saying there's safety in numbers. We know that's true, right? There's safety in numbers. Now, I'm kind of the anomaly, right? I'm like isolated by myself. I ride around on a Gator, and I've got about 18 guys on my grounds maintenance crew, and I issue them sharp implements and sharp tools, and about half of them are murderers, and they could do me in before anybody could ever get down there, if they really wanted to. But generally speaking, we don't ever do anything in a law enforcement setting unless we have the numbers on our side, because there's safety in numbers. And that's what Solomon is saying here. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves, if you don't have relationships like that, or if they're very few, ask yourself, why? Why do so many of us not have these kind of relationships? Why do so many of us find it difficult to walk in that deep spiritual life-giving fellowship with other believers? Why is it that we want to keep things kind of on a superficial level, and we don't want to get too deep where we can really dig in and walk this spiritual journey together? Well, Solomon talks about the enemies of Christian community. Pastor Josh has been talking somewhat, alluding to it, Christian community being the church. And in verses 4 through 7, he lists some enemies of true Christian community. And one of those is jealousy in verse 4. He says, then I saw all the toil and all the skill and work comes from a man's envy of his neighbor. Now here's a question for you to ponder in your own mind this evening. Have you ever found yourself at some deep level celebrating somebody else's failure? I haven't either. I've never done that. I'm just kidding. I confess I've done it. Like, have you ever had that person in your circle, that person that surrounds you, that maybe they stumbled a little bit, and inside you secretly there was that little smile. You're like, I was just waiting for that to happen. How about this? Has someone ever gotten on your nerves because of the good that's happened to them? You've been around that person, or maybe you've known that person, and it just seems like everything seems to fall in place for them. Everything seems to go their way, and you're thinking inside, man, that person just really just irks me, just gets on my nerves. Let me give you some examples. Have you ever had this conversation? Do you know fill in the blank? Oh yeah, I know them. You know what? I can't stand them. They get on my nerves. They think they know it all. They think they're so goody-goody. Jealousy will always derail our chances of a deep relationship, because if you believe you deserve what God has chosen to give others, then you're usurping Christ's lordship in your life. If you believe secretly for some reason that you deserve what God has chosen to give somebody else, then you're usurping Christ's lordship in your life. Christ calls us to know each other in such a way that when good things happen to you, I rejoice. When good things happen to you, it fills me with excitement. I'm genuinely happy. I'm genuinely excited for you, and it encourages me. But also on the flip side of that, when bad things happen to you, I grieve with you. Romans 12:15 tells us to rejoice with those who rejoice and to mourn or weep with those who mourn. Can you see the antithesis of this is for me to rejoice in your grief and to find sorrow in the good things that happen to you. And so if we're really not willing to address that jealousy that sometimes gnaws at us, whether it's, why did that person get that promotion? I'm 10 times smarter than them. I'm 10 times better than them. Or why did that good thing happen to that person? You know what? I deserve something good like that to happen in my life. If we're not willing to really address those things, then that will create a wedge in genuine Christian community. So not only jealousy, but Solomon says laziness. Look at verse 5. He says, the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Jealousy will kill community, but laziness will as well, because developing relationships takes work. And we live in a day and age where schedules are out of control. Did anybody ever feel like your schedule's out of control? With me now being a single parent, I confess, it's like sometimes I just don't know where I'm at, because there's something always. There's a doctor's appointment, or there's a recital, or there's a baseball game, or there's this event, or there's that event, or there's that sleepover, or there's this trip, or there's that trip. And, I'm trying to keep it all straight. Try scheduling something with a friend or a family member. What happens when you say, hey, do you want to do this? Everybody pulls out their phone, right? And they start going through the calendars that, I can't do it this Wednesday because I've got band practice, or I've got this soccer game, or I've got the baseball game, or I can do it 5 weeks from now. That's what it seems like. Try to get 3 or 4 people on the same page about going somewhere. It's a big deal, because relationships take work. It's easy to be lazy relationally. We have to make intentional effort to do that. We've got to take time in our schedules, as Solomon says, to build that 3-cord strand that is not easily broken. It takes a commitment to make plans in that. So Solomon says not only will jealousy derail Christian community, not only will laziness, but he also says dissatisfaction in verse 6. He says, better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and striving after the wind. I have to confess, this was something I struggled with for a long, long time. And what Solomon is saying here is, if we're not careful, we can get so caught up in looking to the future that we forget to live in the present. I did that for many, many years. I look back now and I missed a lot of opportunities because I was always looking to the next thing. I was always looking to the next event. I was always looking to the next opportunity. I was always looking for that next thing, and many times I never really fully enjoyed the present. If your head is always in tomorrow, you can never be present in today, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with planning for the future. There's nothing wrong with looking forward to something that's going to happen out there on the horizon. Nothing wrong with that. But what Solomon is warning us against is a habitual inclination to always have our mind off in that next thing. You might have fallen into that trap. When this happens, then I'll be happy, right? When I get that job, or when I get that promotion, or when the kids graduate high school, or whatever it might be, there's always something off there in the future. And so you'll always be dreaming about what could be instead of what is today. And you miss those subtle beauties in life, where you're at. You miss out. And we have to be very careful of that. And here's another issue. People who are immensely dissatisfied, they suck the life out of other people because they blame everybody else for their dissatisfaction. So the writer of Ecclesiastes says, be careful, because if you really want to have Christian community, you've got to guard against jealousy. You've got to guard against laziness. You've got to be intentional. You have to be present in the moment and not be thinking about things that are off in the future. But fourth, he says, an enemy of Christian community is work. Verse 7, he says, again, I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, neither son or brother, and yet there is no end to all his toil. And his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? Now, I want to be very careful here, because people can tune things out and they can miss what's being said here. There's nothing wrong with having nice things. There's nothing wrong with acquiring nice things. Nothing wrong with working to get those things. That's not what this is about. But the happiest people aren't those who spend money on acquiring, but who spend their time, their investments, and their energy on increasing their relational capacity. I've been around a lot of very wealthy people. I've been around multimillionaires. I've been around people who own very successful businesses, own various areas of commerce. And invariably, it's the people that invest their time, their energies, their talents, their investments in increasing their relational capacity, not just on acquiring materialistic things. Now, there's nothing wrong with having materialistic things. There's nothing wrong with having nice things. We just need to be careful where we're putting our treasures. Maybe people who buy less of a car than they can afford, and they take that money and they spend it or invest it in increasing their relational capacity. Now, I'm going to confess something to you here, and don't hold this against me. I didn't graduate from BHP, all right? Don't throw rocks at me. I graduated from T.L. Hanna High School, all right? Now, really, don't throw rocks at me. But, you know, that has always kind of been the preppy school, the affluent school. And I remember when I was in high school, there was a lot of kids, when they got their driver's license, they got brand spanking new cars. And I'm talking about nice cars. Mustang GT convertibles, BMWs, nice cars. I had an old beat-up Volkswagen van. That's what I had, until I was a senior and I was able to buy my own vehicle. There was a lot of parents that put a lot of hours into the work, but quite a few didn't put hours into their relationships with their kids. And as a pastor over the years, I saw a lot of parents and grandparents pour a lot of things into their kids except time. I never had as a pastor, I never had a young person come to me and say, Pastor, you know what? My life is so horrible. My parents hate me. I have to drive a used Toyota Camry that leaks oil and doesn't pick up all the radio stations. I never had that. But you know what I did have? I did have some kids whose parents were very affluent that poured a lot of monetary investment into their kids, but they didn't put a lot of time and affection, and their kids were in drug and alcohol rehab. I did experience that. And so I want to ask a question. How are we doing? Remember I said that at the beginning? You get asked, how are you doing? But the question is, how are we doing? How are we doing in increasing our relational capacity? How are we doing in coming alongside somebody and really digging deep and giving permission for somebody else to dig deep into your life? When that winter season comes or when that danger comes and you need somebody to come alongside you because we weren't created to live the Christian life alone. How are we doing? Let me ask you another question. What tasks and jobs might be able to fall by the wayside so that you can increase your relational capacity? I wonder what the impact would be on our families, on our friends at work or school or wherever we might be, or what our impact would be even within the church if we made a commitment to deepen our relational capacity. And ask the how are we doing questions. Maybe on Sunday morning we need to look around, as Pastor Josh said this past week, and just say, hey, how are we doing? Is there somebody we need to reach out to? Because God has laid people on our hearts, and He's called us to walk alongside them. I want to close by sharing a very personal story. I haven't shared this with anyone, but prior to Dina passing away, I was with a partner, Sergeant Hester, and his dad was a bivocational pastor. And when you have a partner in law enforcement, that's a pretty special bond because literally you're putting each other's lives in your hands each and every day. And I remember when Dina was taken to the hospital and just everything just went just horribly wrong. And I was sitting there and I already let Christy know, I'd let Dina's dad know, but the third person I called was my partner. And I said, I think I'm going to lose my mind. And he said, I'm coming to sit with you because I don't want you to be alone. Isn't that what a real relationship's about? Being there for somebody, and not just in the good times, but also being there in the really bad when that winter comes, because that three-stranded cord is not easily broken. I'm sure in our church, there's people that they probably feel alone. They feel like they're probably out there, kind of on an island by themselves. They may not think anybody's really concerned. And maybe God is put that person on your heart to go alongside them and say, you know what, you're not in this by yourself. I'm here to help. I'm here to love on you. I'm here to pray with you. I'm here to laugh, to cry, whatever it is you need me to do so that you don't fall by the wayside. God to honor that, amen? God to honor that. God to honor a church that has that kind of heart and that kind of attitude. And I pray that as I do, you'll join with me and say, God, who can I come alongside to be that relational friend? All right, we're going to take prayer requests now.